Good evening and welcome, everybody. It is Tuesday, November 26, 2019 at 6:30 p.m., and I'm calling this meeting of the Wausau City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's proceedings with a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the whole thing just disappeared.
There you go. Oh, crap. Small technical difficulty. Here we go.
There we go. I think it's that box wasn't on, that's what caused the problem.
We're doing fine, don't worry. Like everything else, we'll get through it. This is what I'm going to get started here. My apologies for the delay. First off, we have one proclamation that we'll read while we're getting the system back up. And this is to recognize Small Business Saturday. Whereas the government of the city of Wausau celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and the community. According to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 30.2 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of all firms and paid employees in the United States and are responsible for 65.9% of net new jobs created from 2000 to 2018. And small businesses employ 47.5% of the employees in the private sector in the United States, and 90% of all consumers in the United States value the contributions small businesses make in their community. And 96% of consumers who plan to shop on Small Business Saturday said the day inspires them to go to small, independently owned local retailers or restaurants that they have not tried to or been to before, or would not have otherwise tried. And 92% of companies planning promotions on Small Business Saturday said the day helps their business stand out during the busy holiday shopping season. And the city of Wausau supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our communities. And advocacy groups as well as public and private organizations across the country have endorsed this Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Now, therefore, I, Robert B. Mielke, Mayor of the great city of Wausau, do hereby proclaim November 30th, 2019 as Small Business Saturday, and I urge all the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. Now, moving on, as far as registered citizens that would like to come and speak to an issue, when I call your name, please come forward. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and please state your name and address for the record. We'll start tonight with Ms. Christine Martins. Good evening.
Good evening. I don't need 3 minutes. I just wanted to comment on the athletic field wall construction that is up for vote. I wanted to comment how disappointed I am that not one plan was presented that actually did not assume the raising of that piece of the wall before it was voted on. I do enjoy the woodchucks, been known to go to the games. However, I am also a giant history nerd and appreciate all the history that Wausau does offer, and I find that to be an important piece of history. Thank you.
And thank you. Next up, please, Ms. Shannon Drake. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Shannon Drake. You said my address?
Please.
714 Moreland Ave, Schofield, Wisconsin. Thank you for letting me speak to you guys tonight. I'm here to address Councilwoman Lawrence and the rest of the council. The things you said back in 2003 try not to get emotional, deeply affected me, my family, my daughters. You were elected to represent the city of Wausau, and you say that you're for women, yet you downgraded women in your own community that you were supposed to represent and protect. I don't hate you, I'm disappointed in you, and I'm disappointed in the city council for allowing her to represent the city of Wausau again. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, please, Autumn Drake Dabler. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, my name is Autumn Drake Dabler. My address is 1327 Grand Avenue, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54403. I'm also here to address Councilwoman Linda Lawrence's appointment to the council. All of my cousins back there, they're mixed. Their mothers were not bred with. Their fathers did not come here to breed. And the fact that those statements were made 16 years ago and there still has not been a full apology, there's only been excuses for those statements that are being made. I think we all need to look at ourselves and remember what Wausau is. Wausau is a diverse community. We have such a high Asian population. Hmong and Laotian people came here for a better life, and now they're facing racism here. Black people moved here to try and get away from violence in bigger cities, and this is what they're treated with here. Hispanic people come here for a better life, and they're greeted with racism and just excuses for it. That's my issue with this meeting tonight.
Thank you. And next up, Mr. Chris Norfleet.
Chris Norfleet, 719 Bertha Street, and absolutely, I'm here to talk about Linda Lawrence. And it ain't really about you. It's about the accountability of all of you. To say we owe that community some way of giving them some evidence that this woman has changed her ways. In no form can you suggest to us that we're supposed to be okay with those comments or that behavior. Not then and not now. Some action must be taken in this city to be accountable. All of you. We are not just people you talk nasty about. We're citizens, we're human beings, and we pay your bills. Now, if you want to come down here and be a real citizen and a real lawmaker, a leader, apologize to our community. And then tell us what we're going to get to make sure this is not going to continue. The city has been giving us nothing but words. But that was the most disrespectful act from some of the people who I consider good people. And nobody said, Linda, where are you at now on black people? Are you going to just keep telling us like it is? Are y'all going to let her tell us like it is again? Or y'all going to say, Linda, you're going to have to be held accountable, not just for what you might say, but what you did say. We need to make sure our black community is respected, included, and heard. So this is a call to action, not to demonize you or you, but to say your moral compass has got to be bigger. But I want you to be clear. I'm looking at a segregated city council in a segregated county in a segregated place that's been segregated all your history. So I'm not shocked when a woman who don't know she said something that breaks my heart makes excuses. Make the right move. Mend that fence, and you can do it however you want, but you can start mending that fence tonight.
Thank you. Then moving on towards the consent agenda, starting with file number 19-1101 from the City Council, the minutes of the previous session, which
And
was...
Mayor, you should give her the opportunity to apologize. to my black children. Apologize now.
All right.
Stand up for your apology.
Is that all right if I say?
If you would like to say something, Mrs. Lawrence, go ahead.
If I can say something, it wasn't real successful when I approached, is it Mr. Norfleet, before the meeting. For any of you who have been offended for 16 years over this, I am sorry. I didn't know you. I didn't mean you. I would love to sit down with you and, well, you're shaking your head. You're not giving me a chance, are you?
Am I able to say something?
No, you had your
Ma'am,
chance. At that time, we were spending a lot of money on downtown redevelopment, a lot of money. And actually, we had hired Van de Waal and Associates, who's here tonight, over our zoning ordinance. And we realized you cannot just have beautiful facades and things that people can't afford to shop at. And the people who live around the downtown are hurting. They need jobs, they need support, they need whatever. So if you'd please put that, this isn't an excuse for that word that was offensive, that I'm sorry that I ever used. I am sorry. But not just because it made trouble for me, I'm sorry because it hurt you. I didn't mean for that to happen. We were getting a lot of pressure from people who live in the corridor along Jefferson Street to clean up some places that had activity all night long. Nobody could sleep, and there were drug dealers there. Okay, kind of put this in compartments. I was frustrated because of our inability to fix that. You can't just fix that for people so they can start sleeping. Okay. The police department had what was called a war room at the time. I don't know who's here who would remember that. Was it right or was it wrong? You know, but it was there. And I was taken through the war room. And there were, I don't know, 40 faces or so of predominantly African-American men, probably in their 20s or so. And of course, we elected people at the time were told about different efforts, and the whole issue was drug sales. I was talking to people in social services, in law enforcement, Gary Martin, the sheriff, talking about just different elements that were, different things that were going on in the community. It wasn't because, brown-skinned people were moving here to get away from violence. It wasn't that. The context was drug dealers who came here to make money off of a community that probably had, a willing market of people who were willing to buy them, and that, they could get by here. Another phenomenon, if you'd put that aside, came from, my sister. I'm sorry, she was a NICU nurse in St. Joseph's at the time, and she was telling me about a patient she had, a woman who gave birth to premature twins. And I guess the term now, you're going to be offended, but I don't know how else to say it, was a baby daddy. He wasn't there to help her raise the child. He was off to another woman already. And she was hurting.
Well, why can't you just say sorry and leave it
I
there?
am,
What
no,
is all this
please, I'm talking.
I'm done. That's not
That's
an
the
apology.
context.
That's an apology with an excuse.
Let's keep this respectful, okay?
apologize.
She is
What she
apologizing.
said was not respectful. And you are not respectful either, because you're not protecting our rights either. You have a right as the mayor to protect us.
Would you please do
Okay.
something?
It's okay, Chris.
Something? It's our First Amendment right to be able to speak, and none of you will listen. None of you at all. You still continue your excuses and your lies.
I'll just summarize by saying the issue had to do with people's behavior that was consuming resources and upsetting law-abiding citizens. Skin color had nothing to do with it except for the push that the police department was making for a particular group of, I don't know if they were gang members or not at the time. It had nothing to do with, law-abiding people living in the city. I apologize profusely to people to whom this, blanket of mean-spiritedness spilled over. It had nothing to do with that then, and it doesn't now. But people who are selling drugs, supporting themselves, using women, I'm not going to apologize to those people. They're wrong, they're not contributing to the community. That's about all I have to say on it. Thank you, Mayor.
No problem. Again, starting with the consent agenda for file number 19-1101 from the City Council, the minutes of the previous meeting from November 12th, and ending with file number 19-1112 from the Plan Commission, a resolution approving a public sculpture along the River Edge Parkway at the end of Fulton Street Extended. I'll accept a motion to accept, Motion by Mr. Nutting. Do I have a second? By Mr. Smith.
You may begin voting. Motion passes unanimously.
Did you take a roll?
No, we didn't.
Everybody's
We will know everybody is here.
Everyone's here.
Yeah. For the record, everybody is here. Having problems with the computer tonight. File number, moving on to resolutions and ordinances for file number 19-1103, the mayor's appointments, there's none this evening. Continuing on to file number 19-1107, a joint resolution of the Capital Improvements and Street Maintenance Committee and the Plan Commission accepting dedication of a right-of-way of South 18th Avenue from South 17th Avenue to South 18th Avenue. Committee action, SISM approved 5-0, the Plan Commission approved 5-0. Fiscal impact will be the preliminary estimate to build South 18th Avenue in the new location is approximately $300,000. Entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Gisselman, second by Mr. Martins.
You may begin voting. Motion passes unanimously.
File number 13-0519, a joint resolution of the Economic Development Committee and the Park and Recreation Committee approving the terms and use agreement amendment with the Wisconsin Woodchucks and/or their affiliates and assignees for Phase 4 renovations to Athletic Park and improvements of the surrounding neighborhood infrastructure that supports the facility. Committee action, Economic Development approved 5-0, Park and Rec approved 4-1 for the plans, and then 5-0 for the use agreement. Fiscal impact will be none. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Nutting, second by Mr. Neal. Ms. Lawrence.
Is there a way to amend this to incorporate the concerns about the wall? I have the same concerns. I just don't want to see anything done with those stone walls.
I guess that would be open for some discussion. I know Parks and Rec, or excuse me, the Historical Committee last night had approved it 4-1 as far as option number A, letter A, excuse me. We could discuss, let me see who's up next. Ms. McElhaney, excuse me, Mr. Martins.
Sorry.
Flunked out of med school, right?
All right, thank you, Mayor. I did, and initially in the Economic Development Committee, I did vote to move this item forward to the council. I do have some concerns, though, about the wall. After further study and reflection, especially after reading the minutes of the Parks and Recs Committee, which wasn't available at the time when we were at Economic Development. And the design was really of the first base side, although it was talked about at Economic Development, it was really downplayed in that committee meeting, so I don't think we really got an idea of what would happen. And I really would like to see something that is more, like Ms. Lawrence said, it's something that's more sensitive to the history and the character of Athletic Park, and some options on what could be done with the wall along the first base side. Could there be design options to either move, something more appropriate to move, rebuild, or better incorporate the wall into that structure? But I think as it stands, unless I see something a little bit more substantial on either protecting or keeping with the character of that wall, I'm going to be voting no at this point in time.
Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I was involved in both of the committee meetings that discussed and passed this, the Parks and Rec and the Economic Development. I've lived here on the east side for maybe 21 years, I guess, this year. And as I said in at least one of the meetings, that park doesn't really look very much at all like it did 21 years ago when I first got here. Certainly had its charm, and, you know, I was glad to see it here, and I was glad to see it was being used. But there's been a lot of changes to the park since then. It does not look like it used to. The main grandstand area from the outside does not look anything like it used to. It has undergone a lot of changes, and a lot of investment from Mr. McDonald. Part of the reason to do this project on the first base side is to incorporate a new locker room behind the dugout for visiting teams, because there is none whatsoever right now. As Mr. McDonald said, right now, the home team's dugout and associated locker room is almost like, you know, college level in its sophistication. And on the visiting side, it's like Little League. That requires quite a bit of infrastructure that has to be dealt with. So this is presented to the committees as a must in order to achieve the desired result. But that short section of wall that would go away would feature instead, I think it was 4 or 5 columns, granite columns, to complement the look of the park everywhere else that you walk around the park. So that sort of historic feel is going to be maintained in a more vertical than horizontal way. I'm sorry, but even Wrigley Field has undergone changes over the years. And there was huge fights in Chicago about things going on at Wrigley Field. But I don't think many people look back and go, oh, they never should have done that. There's been changes to historic parks all over in the major leagues. And there's also been a whole lot of parks that just were found to be past their day, and they're gone, and they've been replaced. And we've got a gem here, and I see a very bright future for it. It's a big feature for the city of Wausau, and it does need some help to approach the future. It's just as simple as that. It can't go forward in its current state. It has to continue this metamorphosis that's been going on. I appreciate what's been happening to it, and I fully support this, and I really, I feel it's a good compromise. It's something between 8 and 12%. 8% of the total linear footage of stone wall is what we're talking about. The rest of it is still there, ringing the whole park. So this is merely changing an element of the park to meet certain needs. So I do support it, and I hope everybody thinks about it that way.
Mrs. Towle.
Thank you, Mayor. I read the meeting minutes from the two committees, Economic Development, Park and Rec, and there was a lot of discussion about to be made available 500 parking spaces. Now, this, I understand it doesn't mean 500 brand-new parking spaces, but I reviewed the term and use agreement amendment, and there was no language for the made available 500 spaces. So can I get confirmation from committee members and Christian Schock if that was just committee talk, or is that included in the amendment? Because it's not in there.
Chris, if you could come forward, and I know Jamie Polly is here too. I think I had seen her if she would like to come forward.
Yep, glad to clarify. So there's two issues. One is the amendment of the use agreement, and the other is the terms of a new development agreement. The term sheet, which is in the packet and which was approved by the ED committee, details the elements that are not use issues with the park, but rather, separate issues for the improvement of the facility. Parking is one of them.
Is that the one that's in draft form?
There's no draft. It's a term sheet. So the council approves the term sheet, and then then we would draft with our attorneys a development agreement, which the developer would sign in concert with that, with those terms.
Is the term sheet included in our docket?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I didn't see the term sheet. I just saw a draft template, and it didn't have anything filled
Yeah,
out.
the draft is the use agreement. Again, the use agreement is separate than the term sheet. I'm not looking at, I don't have your packet in front front of me, but it is associated with the resolution.
Did everybody see the term sheet? Did it include 500 parking
Third page
available?
of the resolution.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mrs. Rasmussen.
Thank you. I agree with Alder Neal on this issue because I think that I am interested in preserving the historic nature of Athletic Park, but I think the fact that the vast majority of the wall remains intact, the fact that they're willing to reuse some of the material or mimic the original design to keep the feel and the original spirit of the park alive, I think will allow us to do both things. It'll allow us to develop the park, to enhance the fan offerings, to enhance the game experience for the visiting team, but then also to keep the aesthetic or a similar aesthetic to what's out there already. And so we can still preserve a good portion of that history, but we then also can enhance the experience at the park and perhaps enhance its offerings a bit. And so those two things, I think, can be balanced, and I think we can have a successful outcome. The Athletic Park neighborhood has always been supportive of the park, and, I think that with the investments that Mr. McDonald has put in over the years, designing both the park, the mezzanine, improvements to the park, improvements to the stands, all of those things have just heightened the experience there, and we are so grateful for that. And I think that more of that is not a bad thing. I think that the park has, and the team has shown itself to be an important attractor to Wausau. And I think that that's something that we certainly can balance. And so that's why I voted for it in ED. I hope that we support it tonight. If there was no proposed reuse and no proposed design elements that captured the spirit of the original look of that wall, I may oppose it as well. But I think that we've got a good balance here, and I think that the fact that the Historic Preservation Commission looked at it as well and did not find the design to be over the top as far as what was being removed, I think that we can get where we need to be and still leave the majority of the wall intact.
Ms. Lawrence.
Is there a rendering that we could look at in terms of the proposed alteration to the wall? I didn't see anything like that, because if there isn't, are we able to approve this contingent upon the council
Mr.
actually
McDonald is
approving?
here. I was going to call him
Yeah.
at the end, but I did see the designs that's been presented to the Historical Committee on several occasions.
The answer is yes. It was part of the Historical Society Preservation meeting last night. I'm not sure that you must not have been included with what you were doing. So, yeah. Continue on, or you want to let?
I was about to say, if you want to answer questions, but next up would be Mr. Peckham.
I'll just stay here.
Stay right there,
Yeah, okay.
because I was going to ask the mayor if we could hear from you. I think if you were coming at us and saying, I want to modify, chop a hole in the west wall or the south wall, you'd have a war on your hands. I'm quite comfortable with the not so very visible portion of the wall that you are looking to modify, and I'm wondering if you could talk about kind of the necessity, and if we say you can't mess with the wall, I think that kills your plan. Is that right?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and there's a reason why this was the last aspect that we looked at. Back in 2012, when I bought the woodchucks, we put a lot of thought into the big picture of Athletic Park, and we started phase one, but when we called it phase one, it was obvious there was going to be more phases. But the reason why we put this one off to last was because this area of the ball field is very tight. The craftsmen that built the wall back in the 1930s were very talented people, but they didn't have straight lines, and so it's not even. And so the first base side of the field is very, very tight. And so if we were to put the structure that we've designed, which is a dugout, a place for the visiting team to change, some new premium seating, and two small concession stands, it would sit 4 feet from the historic wall, which is not even enough for people to pass through, or even for them to queue to kind of get into the concession stands. We thought about doing things like, building on top of the wall, but that really doesn't work because the wall does not have footings to it, so it doesn't work. Really, at the end of the day, a wall is meant to impede movement and get in the way, and that's kind of what it was doing here. There's nobody that loves the historic wall more than me. Through all the work we've done at Athletic Park, we've gone through great lengths to save the wall. Phase 1, Phase 2, both went over the wall. Phase 1, Phase 2 provided some great backlighting to sort of light up the wall. And if you drive past Athletic Park at night now, it's an amazing sight. It really stands out. The design, which is being passed around, and you can look at it right now, really mimics what you see from the front of the stadium. It's a combination of burnished block, granite, and green. And if you've ever been to a ballpark in the United States, Fenway, Wrigley Field, you name it, there's always green metal, and we have that again here. And so it's very, very similar to what you have at the front of the stadium. And the other thing that's interesting about it, in designing the way we have, it's our hope that somewhere on that wall, we can create a mural that will celebrate the history of baseball at Athletic Park. We don't have a place for the Central Wisconsin Hall of Fame. We don't have a place to talk about all the Major League Baseball players that passed through here, and we really don't have a place to, to sort of honor the craftsmen who built the wall. I have lots of great stories from people who come by to tell me, and there's some great pictures of that ballpark that would work really well, and that's kind of what we're thinking down the road. Other things you think I need to say, Pat?
We have one more council member, Mr. Gisselman, that would like to speak.
Thank you. Well, I've pretty much at every vote throughout this whole process, I voted against this. I feel that these 4 sections of granite walls were built in the 1930s by the Works Progress Administration in giving relief to workers during the Great Depression under Franklin Roosevelt's term. I feel that this is put on the register of the city of Wausau back in 2000 as the city of Wausau landmark, and indeed it is. I think these 4 sections, along with the south section, are perhaps the most visible. I mean, this is the sections that face the park. These are the sections that everybody sees. They have to walk past to, or at least close to get into the stadium. And I feel that these are truly a part of Athletic Park. I think a key part of what the city wants to, and what this, start over, it's just really a part of what the city's history is all about. Baseball has been a long history in the city. Athletic Park is a big part of that, and those granite walls since the 1930s are a big part of Athletic Park. And I think that those 4 sections, in my view, are a key part, and thus I voted against all of those. I voted against this throughout this whole process. I feel that we should really be in a key effort to save them. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No problem. Ms. Lawrence?
Since you're here, I've wanted to ask you a question for years, and we've never met. Have you ever considered changing your title to Wausau Woodchucks? Why Wisconsin? You're in a partnership with us. You represent us when you go on the road, and yet you're kind of Wisconsin Woodchucks. They don't give you a dime.
Well, yeah.
Do they?
There's a long story behind that.
Well-
And I wasn't the one that changed the name. That when they originally came to Wausau, they were called the Wausau Woodchucks. And then in 1998, the name got changed. Changing a baseball team's name is very expensive in a lot of ways. Branding, logos, and it's just, there's other battles I want to fight. I think, when this is done, there'll be close to $8 million invested in the athletic park, and I think I've made quite a commitment to Wausau, so I don't really worry about it that much. A name's a name. I know it matters to a lot of other people, but I think 70% of our fans come from outside the city of Wausau. You know, that's, and when you look on the outfield wall, you'll see Mid-Wisconsin Beverage, you'll see all sorts of other companies that, are from, Wisconsin Chevy dealers. There's lots of other businesses out there, Culligan and whatnot, that are from all over central Wisconsin. And it's really is a regional team. I recognize what Wausau has done, and I know it's important to them. I never would have changed the name. As we sit here today, it's tough and expensive to change it back. And I have a lot of battles to fight every day, in terms of, selling tickets and employing and finding staff and everything like that.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. McDonald, for past work that you've done on this historic park and revitalizing it and preserving it as is. And I think these pictures have really spoken to us visually in more words than any of us could say. That is a very excellent rendering of what it will look like, and it has taken aspects of the historic nature and has pronounced it. But I see that you're going to have a history of the wall's creation, of the history of the baseball's prominence in the community, and I really appreciate what you've done and have improved the fan experience. And this is definitely going to aid not only in our visitor teams, but in our fan experience for just experiencing a great pastime. So thank you, and I'll vote for this.
Go ahead.
Just one more comment.
Go ahead, sir.
When we started this, back in 2012, the idea was to create a asset for the community that they could be proud of. And I love the history of Athletic Park. I've got pictures, some great pictures in my office if anybody ever wants to see them. I don't know if you know this, but there used to be a bull in left field, the bull that was in Bull Durham. We used to have one here in Wausau, and it's gone. That was before the wall was built even. But all along, the goal has been to create a beautiful community asset that families in the neighborhood and business people could feel comfortable to come out with. And that's been the really wonderful thing about everything we've done so far, is that the families have come back. And that really, if you come to a game, and you see the kids out there in the neighborhood park playing, the score could be 1-0 in the baseball game, but the kids are out there on that playground having a blast. And it's a great feeling. So,
Mr. Peckham?
Yeah, just a quick question, and then maybe we can vote on this thing. Do you foresee any chance that you're going to be back here in a few years asking us if we could just please knock down a little bit more of that wall?
No, this is it. I mean, really, this is sort of the last piece. I mean, there's always going to be little things, the baseball business, the hospitality business, I don't care what it is, if you aren't constantly reinventing yourself and changing things. But the park, as it is designed right now, it will be pretty much what it is. We're going to hope to get a video board. We'll probably do lots of little things to kind of improve the stadium. But I mean, this is sort of the last piece of the puzzle right here.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to know if Ms. Polly had anything else to add to it. If so, otherwise, thank you.
You may begin voting. Motion passes 9-2.
File number 19-1113, an ordinance of the Plan Commission amending the citywide zoning map corresponding to the updated zoning ordinance. Committee action approved 5-0. The fiscal impact will be none. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Gisselman, second by Mr. Martins. Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm no zoning whiz, not even a little bit. But, I do know, and we all know that, historically, zoning designations have been a way to sort of maintain certain status quos in neighborhoods, to supposedly protect certain neighborhoods from going down. and really have de facto served to encourage segregation. To what degree does the new zoning concept either promote or hinder diversity in our community?
Well, we've got our city planners here. We've also got Mike Slavy he's our consultant that we hired from Vanderwall and Associates. This has been a process that we've been working on for the last year and a half plus. This is also the first time the zoning code has been updated since 1967. We have Brad Lenz here.
Thank you.
And go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'd just like to introduce Mike Slavny from Vanderwall. He is, I'm not exaggerating when he is probably the premier expert in zoning in the state of Wisconsin, if not a bigger area. We've been fortunate to work with him for the last 18 months and bring in some of our concepts from our comprehensive plan that we passed in 2017. Again, the zoning code from 1967, how did that relate to our comprehensive plan, which does include things like diversity of housing, opportunities for more different types of income stratification and things like that. And that's been a main focus of the zoning code rewrite, is to bring in different types of housing. It's been an economic strategy of ours as well. So we did try to incorporate those things. There are more zoning districts, just in a nutshell, and maybe Mike has some things to add, but we do have more zoning districts that do offer a variety. There's more flexibility, especially in the central part of the city, for people to invest in their homes. If something is non-conforming, it's not going to prevent them from making improvements because their house is technically non-conforming to our zoning. So making the non-conforming lots now conforming kind of opens up the ability for people to invest in a smaller home and make progress as they move throughout their life. So just off the top of my head, it's a good question, a very theoretical question. I'm not sure I have the best answer. If Mike has anything to add?
Briefly.
Okay.
Those were good answers. More zoning districts allow us to match the fine-grain pattern of actual development in the city. And by having a finer grain pattern, we can more accurately reflect what's on the ground and match the actual diversity of housing in the community with zoning. That's one thing. We want to encourage mixed-use redevelopment. It's hard to redevelop retail because the rents just can't afford a new building. So in the aging commercial parts of the city, our new zoning code will enable upper-story residential development, which is the most cost-effective way to provide a lot of new housing units, and the actual rent paid helps subsidize the commercial rents on the ground floor and helps small businesses, rather than the national chains, become established. And then finally, much of the city was developed before zoning was invented in the 1920s. And not surprisingly, many houses or other buildings are built too close to property lines. Sometimes there are two principal buildings on a lot. All of those were not permitted by the current code, and so those structures are legal non-conforming structures, and there are limits on the degree to which those can be repaired or expanded. The new code makes every one of those buildings fully legal. The code says that. It removes a cloud on the title. It allows unlimited reinvestment, including structural repairs, and it allows those structures to be expanded as long as they meet the setback rules. So I think, in addition to what Mr. Lentz said, these three aspects of the new code will help address your concern.
Mrs. Tao?
Thank you, Mayor. As Councilmember Neal has concerns about diversity, I have I guess, concerns about fairness and transparency, and to provide some context for the council. You remember, many months ago, we had discussions about the VFW's application for a zoning amendment, and then a gentleman, Mr. Yang, coming forward about the property at 316 Sherman Street for a UDD request, right? And so I started going through the packet of information, and thank you for summarizing. I love this. I didn't get through the whole thing, but I paid attention to the revisions that were made to Article X under the administrative and operations, how we will govern zoning, okay? And Brad, thank you so much for getting back to me on all my questions this afternoon via email. Sometimes we don't have enough time to get through all the packet of information that we have in just a few days. And I just want to clarify that when I looked at the sections 23.10.31 and 23.10.30, which speaks to zoning map amendment, zoning ordinance amendment, and then when I got to the part which I believe is speaking to UDDs, which is now called PUDs, the two that I mentioned earlier refers the governing, planning, zoning commission to go back to 23.10.22. And it states if an applicant submits an application for any kind of amendment or new zoning, then you follow 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So my question for tonight is that clarity now there that doesn't matter if it's a UDD, a new zoning request, a zoning amendment, that we're going to follow that same set of procedures, because in the old zoning ordinance from 1967, it states in there that there's discretion, right, or judgment upon the zoning board or commission can make a decision if they feel that notice should go out for a public hearing to those who live 100 feet away, or I think 1,000 feet away from the impacted structure that's being rezoned or requested for. So the question is, for UDD and all the amendments and new zoning, do we now follow the same process from 1 through 5 on sections 23.10.22? Or is there still discretion given to staff and to this zoning commission to make that judgment call?
Well, I think the procedures now in the new code are going to be much clearer than they were in the old code. In the old code, it was somewhat open for interpretation of staff, which could have been overruled by Plan Commission or the council at any time. It wasn't just staff making a call. Staff brought a recommendation to the Plan Commission. They could overrule that decision made by staff. So there's always checks and balances in the old system. This new code does have more specific procedures that's clearer for us to make a judgment call. Honestly, there's always going to be some sort of judgment call, no matter how, we have a 400-some page document. It's always going to be a little bit of interpretation, but there's also checks and balances. So if someone doesn't agree with the decision that staff has made, there is always the opportunity for the Plan Commission and council to sort of override those decisions. But again, with that being said, in the new code, there is a section of procedures, review and procedures,
10.22.
231044 specifically for PUDs. That's specific to PUDs.
Okay.
Which is different. It's in addition to the procedures for a zoning map change in 231031, which applies to any zoning district change, not just PUDs, but from a commercial to a residential district. You'd have to meet the zoning map procedures, but then for PUDs, you'd have an additional review checklist, if you will, outlined in 231044.
Okay, so can you tell us what's the in addition that's different so that it's known to all council members? And I do want to add too that, yes, the recommendation may come from planning to the full common council, but if you're new like me and if you're like Alderperson Neal, who is not a novice in zoning ordinance, right, we probably wouldn't know how to ask, and it wouldn't be knowledge that we may have. So I'm just going to speak from my own perspective that that information I was never aware of. So if I asked questions in the past, it was to better understand, because I probably wouldn't be able to read 400 pages and be able to dictate what it all truly means.
Sure.
So can you just tell us what is in addition to the PUDs that's maybe not included for the other zoning?
I mean, there's 7 pages of it, starting on page 393, I guess.
Do they all follow having to have public notice, even the PUDs?
Not necessarily. I guess what's different, I mean, the overall process is going to be very similar,
Okay.
but what's different is that there's more, again, more specificity and in the new code that we'll be able to interpret exactly what steps we should be following, whereas before it was, trying to read between the lines, if you will, where now it's more laid out for us to understand.
And Brad, I'm sorry too, I didn't get to that part to review the .44, and then we were towards at the end of the day today, and so I apologize that I'm extending the long conversation here. But as long as there's clarity, and it looks like there's additional stipulations for PUDs, but I'm going to assume that there's also going to be a public hearing notice if there's an applicant who puts out a request for a PUD. Can you just at least say that we have to follow that too? Is that in there?
For a new PUD, yes.
For a new one?
Right.
If we're amending, then,
There is still discretion on whether a new public hearing needs to be held or not. The issue is whether it's a new use or not. If it's the same use, it's not really an amendment. We don't care about one owner versus another owner, one type of restaurant versus another type of restaurant. What the zoning staff is really looking at is this a change of use, and how big of a change of use is it? If it is indeed a change, it may not be a change of use at all, and then that's just a matter of, there wouldn't be the full public hearing requirement, but.
I think the nice thing is that there's clarity for the other zoning amendments now, because I don't think that that was a requirement before to give out notice, but I see that it's referring back to that process and procedure, so I'm really happy to see that part. And I don't want to waste any more of your time and the council members' time on the PUD, so thank you so much.
Mr. Peckham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brad, I imagine you could, Mr. Lenz, you could answer this, or Mr. Slavny. In light of the sentiment that we are hearing from our community in terms of being more responsive to the needs of the homeless, I'm wondering if you could talk about whether the new zoning code changes the minimum dwelling size, and whether the new zoning code changes the number of unrelated adults that may live under one roof.
Well, I guess a couple comments. On page 9, there is a new chart that we didn't have before. There's actually a lot more definition to what a family is. So that's clear, and as long as folks are related as a family, it's considered a single-family unit. Well, I'll have to maybe defer on the building size to either Bill or Mike, but the other thing that the code does is offer the charts that say different uses and what districts they're allowed in. So, for example, community living arrangements are permitted in a variety of zoning districts, and you can see exactly which ones are there that they're permitted in. Other uses, institutional, residential, there are conditional uses, and there's 7 or 8 different districts that you can apply for a conditional use in. So I guess just from a usability standpoint for us, for folks that are looking to do these types of living arrangements, it's easy for them to see, okay, I want to do this, where can I do this, what districts can I do it, do I need a conditional use, or is it permitted in a district? A lot of the different arrangements are actually permitted in residential districts. So again, just from a functional perspective, it is a lot easier to tell where can we do different types of living arrangements, because there are quite a variety of different ones that are classified from a zoning perspective.
So if somebody wanted to set up a community living arrangement, this package of rules and regulations does not make it more difficult.
I would say no, probably easier.
I believe the new code makes it a little bit easier because the state divides community living arrangement into 3 categories based on size. And this code reflects the statutes and allows those smaller community living arrangements to be permitted by right, which frankly the state statutes say they have to be. So there was a little bit of a disconnect that the current code wasn't recognizing the same categories. Not illegally, but it was a choice that was made when that portion of the code was written. So again, there'll be more opportunities created under the new code to provide for a much wider variety of housing.
Thank you. I see Mr. Sipples ready to leap to the microphone and be heard.
I can just address the question on the structure size. I don't have the old code in front of me to check, but the minimum structure size in most districts is 800 square feet, and I believe that is the same as it was in the old code, 800 square feet. We did decrease the minimum unit size on larger multifamily projects to allow for more efficiency and studio-style apartments, so.
Thank you. I think that's good news for possibility of a low-income rehabilitative facility or supervised living for the formerly homeless or something like that. So I think that's good.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. First, I have to say that it's a good day for Wausau that this is done. This has been the culmination of an awful lot of work and time put into revamping the zoning code. We, for years, I think, on a number of developments, struggled with ambiguities in the old code, but I also think that so often the code was difficult for developers to understand. It was difficult for business owners to understand. I mean, just as an example, it addressed signs in a half a dozen different places. So just when you think you knew what you were supposed to have or put up or what you could have, if you go a chapter or 2 forward, you perhaps can't. And so often with the old code and its cumbersome nature and somewhat chaotic assembly, you were dependent on the professionals to tell you what it all meant. I mean, it was not user-friendly at all. And so I like the fact that a lot of that stuff has been sorted out. It's also, like they said, opened the door for people to modify homes that they couldn't before, which perhaps was holding people up on making some necessary repairs. And, so often with older neighborhoods, we complain about aesthetics, but then we presented roadblocks for people to address those aesthetics. And, to Pat's point about transitional housing or emergency housing providers, we committed a couple weeks ago to the community to do everything we could do to try to pull the roadblocks out of the process for the nonprofits who provide service to homeless to do their work. And I think revamping some of these things to make it easier for those options to exist and to further their mission certainly makes sense. So I'm excited to see this come forward. It's a little different, but it also is much needed, and thank heavens it's done. So I fully intend to support both items tonight for this.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you to our guests, and if I could have you step up again and just restate what caught my ear was the non-conforming parcels that are scattered throughout, especially throughout our older neighborhoods in the Central City area. Non-conforming, maybe there's, the buildings are built too close compared to what would be the code today, or multiple buildings on one lot. Again, restate what that means, that these are now in code or brought into, if you could pardon my...
Right, there are different kinds of nonconformities. There's substandard lots that are too small or too narrow or don't have enough street frontage. There are nonconforming buildings. Typically, it's a setback issue. In some cases, you have, the building might be conforming, but the parking lot isn't for some reason. That would be a nonconforming site. And this code directs each of those issues directly, and it says that any one of those 3 types of nonconformity, and there are thousands
Yes.
in the city, are now fully legal. It says that directly, which means there isn't a cloud on the title related to those. Things that really result from something getting built and then the rules get changed.
Yeah, so for instance,
And s-
there's something in a title on a previous parcel that was sold, and it's maybe a building, if it couldn't be changed, or if it happened to burn down, it couldn't be rebuilt.
Right now, right now, there's a statute that allows buildings to be rebuilt for a fire. So this isn't so much maybe getting in the way of sales, but it does get in the way of reinvestment. And in the other codes that we produce that have taken this approach, it's the last dozen years or so, we've got about 12 of those codes. There's been a big uptick in reinvestment in the older parts of the community because the cloud has been pushed away and the sunshine of new investment can shine on the property.
Possible investments may not have taken place as a result of a hindrance of a code.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Lawrence?
I have a question for you on the same subject. I took some notes at the Plan Commission meeting the other night, and obviously I needed to be brought up to speed in a few days, and thank you and your staff so much for doing that. But I'm still a little bit stuck on, give me an example, please, of making fully legal all substandard lots. I get the buildings and all that, and also non-conforming uses in buildings. Does this also legalize uses that are now non-conforming, like say in what we call a B, a business activity going on illegally in a residential, and can that party come in then and say, well, I was doing that at the end of 2019, didn't you, I'm grandfathered in.
Right.
So if you would address those two things, thank you.
The substandard lots, in both your subdivision ordinance and your zoning code, you have requirements for lot area. For example, with only 2 residential districts, there were hundreds of lots on the southeast side of the city and on the west side of the city that didn't meet those lot area requirements. We now have a zoning district to accommodate those lots. But every now and then, there's a lot that got created somehow in the past, maybe before zoning, that's too small. So this ordinance clearly says that that lot can be used for all legal purposes, and structures can be placed on that lot so long as all the setbacks are met. Okay. Right, or that the lot coverage maximum is not exceeded. The other question that you had, could you remind me about it?
Well, it just had to do with uses.
Yes, thank you. So we talked about that, and currently your code allows non-conforming uses to continue, but if they go away for a year, they cannot be reestablished, and this code uses the same approach. Generally, we like to see non-conforming uses go away, but this code does not force that to happen. If they voluntarily go away, then they're gone, just like under the current code.
Any other questions? Okay, before we move forward, I'd like to recognize and say thank you to our city planning department, our inspections department. This is another plan of numerous ones, probably about 9 or 10 that have been either updated or actually created here in the last 3 years. The city is moving forward in the right way. But again, I want to recognize the city planning department, the inspections department, community development, and the economic development for all the plans that they've done. But in particular, this one, respectfully, this was a tedious one. But we've moved forward, and it's more clarity, and it's something that people can understand now. And this is the first one. This has been updated since 1967, comprehensive plan, first one since 2005. We update our plans continuously. So with that, Mary?
And you may begin voting. Dawn's not going to
Where's Tom?
vote? Okay.
Okay.
And that motion passes unanimously.
And I'd also like to say thank you to Mike. Okay, moving on to file number 19-1113, an ordinance of the Plan Commission repealing and reenacting Title 23 of the Wausau Municipal Code for zoning ordinances. Committee action approved 5-0. Fiscal impact will be none. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mrs. Rasmussen. Do I have a second by Mr. Smith?
You may begin voting. Motion carries unanimously.
File number 19-1111, a resolution of the Public Health and Safety Committee supporting passage by the State Senate of 8 bills dealing with the homelessness issues here in Wisconsin. Committee action approved 4-0. The fiscal impact will be none. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mrs. Rasmussen, second by Mr. Peckham. Mrs. Rasmussen.
Thank you. I just want to take a second to thank Mr. Peckham for bringing this item forward to Public Health and Safety. It came to his attention that there are 8 bills sitting in the state Senate awaiting action. Obviously, it's no secret that there's a little partisan fight going on down in Madison, and we did pledge to the community that we would do what we could do to assist the cause of homelessness in our area wherever we can. And so a number of these bills help nonprofits and help communities address the issues of homelessness effectively. And so to see state Senate action on those and have those items approved and freed up certainly would help communities across the state. It's also my hope that we as a council speaking with one voice on this issue could not only stimulate some action down in Madison, but also share this action with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and hope that some other communities across the state dealing with the same issues would join us in the same effort. So thank you, Mr. Peckham.
Mr. Peckham?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Rasmussen. Yeah, this kind of all came together quickly in the last 6 days, practically. So for politics going on in Madison, it's unfortunate, but I think these are all bills that we can get behind, and one of the indications that they are not authored by wild-eyed bleeding hearts is that the name of State Representative Patrick Snyder is on, I think, every one of them as a sponsor. They're well-thought-out, kind of multidisciplinary group, multi-agency task force that put these together. It's good stuff. They passed easily in the Assembly. There are, I guess, 3 state senators who aren't so sure, but hopefully the, kind of the passage of a little bit of time will soften them up, and if we can get this resolution in there and maybe help, move it along. So it would be great to see happen.
And you may begin voting. Motion passes unanimously.
And there's an addendum for file number 18-0704, a resolution of the Capital Improvements and Street Maintenance Committee approving jurisdictional transfer agreements for McIndoe Street, 5th Street, 6th Street, 1st Street, and Scott Street from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Committee action approved 3-0. Fiscal impact is none. The connecting highway mileage will not significantly change with the new route. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Nutting. Do I have a second? Mr. Smith?
You may begin voting. Motion passes unanimously.
And at this time, if there's any members of the audience that would like to come forward and speak on an issue brought forward tonight or anything going on in the city, now's your chance. Would anybody like to come forward and speak on a matter?
Okay, my name is Albert Meyer, 1226 Stark Street, Wausau 03. I've been going to Athletic Park since it became the Wausau Mets, but that's beside the point. But I just wonder if the attendance figures justify this renovation. And if you folks ever get the opportunity, go to a game in Wisconsin Rapids and see the rafters. And go behind home plate and look up at posters and the mementos about the players who used to play there. And it's pretty neat. And unfortunately, folks, we don't have that here. We don't. Go to a Woodchuck game and see if you can find something like that. You can't. It's unfortunate.
I do know part of the plans for the future is to have a mural recognizing those baseball players that have made it in the big leagues or in the Hall of Fame. It is coming.
This is going to sound a little bit out of place, but I think if Mr. McDonald had his way, he'd put a dome on the ballpark. Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Peckham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to, looking out in the audience, I'd like to thank everybody who stayed for the whole meeting. I hope it was not too unbearable. I'd also just like to comment quickly. I was invited this morning to a little discussion group in my district, and I didn't know what I was getting into exactly. But they're a small group, and they get together and discuss matters of import. And what they left me with is pretty thought-provoking, and that is that as we make our decisions here, we should use, there are 3 measures that we should use to decide whether to vote yes or no. Is the measure fair? Does the measure show respect to those it will affect? And does it provide a community good? And all 3 of these gentlemen are quite articulate, and I've invited them to perhaps come and talk to us a little more about those topics. But I think it would be good, if we had the agenda, I'm not proposing this for real, but it would be interesting to have the agenda and have check marks after each item. And if it only gets 2 checks, then we just think hard about it. But anyway, just kind of a good thought for today.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to extend a thank you to our staff in the reopening of the major thoroughfares that have been so wonderfully rebuilt, recreated, repaired, etc. It was a trying time to go through, certainly, but we're going to be better for it for many, many years, and appreciative of the work that our staff has done to get us back open again. Thank you.
I say this all the time unabashedly. We've got the best staff in the world, and I mean that. I'm very proud of all of you. And to our guests tonight, thank you for coming here. You are always welcome. Please know that. No matter what some people say, everybody is welcome here in the city of Wausau. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Neal, second by Mr. Peckham.
Begin voting. Oh, some of them didn't work. Motion passes. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night and a happy Thanksgiving. There's a lot to be thankful for.